Tom Stine, thank you so much for doing this. Obviously, the 50th anniversary of Golfweek, you, your dad, family members, I mean, not just instrumental, there's not even a thought of this if there was no Stine family. When you think about the fact that it's 50 years old and you think about, going way back, your childhood and growing up and watching your dad build this thing and then becoming such a big part of it, what's the first thing that goes into your mind at 50 years?
Wow, that's a really good question to start. The first thing that goes into my mind, I guess, is we never we never thought that this far in advance. We never thought we never thought beyond the end of the year. We never thought uh, much beyond 6 months. It was a hand to mouth. It was all Dad's idea. He his original idea for Florida Golf Week and putting out a news publication. He did not want to put out a feature golf magazine. He wanted to publish the news. If it was if it happened last week, it would be in this week's Golf Week. And one of his other mandates was that we would run all names and all scores, not just the top 10 or the top 5 and not just their scores, but if you WD'd, your name would be in Golf Week and it would say WD. And if you shot a million, it would say that you shot a million. And we were insistent upon that. Uh, when people would want to send us their results, you have to send us all of your results. We just don't want to hear who finished in the top 10. It
You
would
know, it's in,
Go ahead.
it's interesting asking players about Golf Week. The first thing they talk about is the agate. They all read the agate. And
Exactly.
how important was that?
How what?
How important was that to the development of the magazine that
It
players
was
needed to read
it
this?
was essential. It was absolutely essential. It was essential for the players because I mean, you got to remember when this was, in the 70s, and you couldn't get this anywhere else. Golf World was around, but uh, Golf World they limited themselves to only certain tournaments and only certain results because given their format and the expense of their format, that's all they could afford to do. And the other wasn't important enough. And our attitude was exactly the opposite. Every name would be in there. Consequently, we had mothers and fathers and brothers and grandmothers and aunts and uncles who wanted to subscribe to Golf Week because their nephew or their niece or their grandson was playing in some junior tournament in Pittsburgh and they got to see his name in print even even if he finished way down the list. It was a cool thing. I mean, God, light years before internet, there was no other way to know. There was no other way to see results, and we profited and grew off of the off of the bottom of the list. Everybody know who won, but some people wanted to see the miscuts.
It's a great strategy. Okay, wait, I got to
Now,
go
it
back
wasn't
to
a
ground.
strategy. It was what we did. Nobody else did that, and it turned into a strategy.
It did. It did.
It,
Okay, let's go back to the ground floor. I got to ask you, just because I've heard so much about this, fact or fiction, this was really started in a garage. I mean, really, like right in the garage. Is that how this? Give us the going way back.
it started in the garage. Swear to God, Dad's garage, which which I don't know, a year or so after we started it, we we put paneling on the walls of the garage, but we were still in the garage, and it went from there. And Dad is the one that started it, and he and my stepmother Jackie, who's still alive and doing well, um, they were instrumental. And Dad, um, he got help from some local guys who worked at the paper, at the Winter Haven News Chief, to help him here and there, and literally just going out to tournaments, calling tournaments, and telling him what he was doing. And if you'll send us your results, we'll print it and we'll send you copies. What this was light years before the ABC Invitational in Podunk, Florida, ever got publicity for anything. So they said, "Great, we'd love to do that. We get all of our names and um, and it just continued on from there."
You talked a little about Jackie. She was actually the golf wonk, right? I mean, from what I've heard, your dad was a decent golfer, but Jackie was actually a decent player, right?
Jackie was a good player, and she was an avid player. She would play anytime, anywhere, any weather. Dad would say, I'm going to go, I need to drive and review this course and do a feature. And Jackie was there. She went every time, and she could beat his brains out. And he was an average golfer on a good day.
Makes it even more impressive his passion for the game, though, in a lot of ways, right?
He was a journalist. That true from all his life. He worked at newspapers, and he had a couple of small town newspapers for a while in Ohio. He worked at big newspapers like the Cleveland Plain Dealer and the Columbus Citizen Journal, and several others in Ohio. But he was a newspaper man, and that's where the uh, that's where the lifeblood came for Golf Week, was his passion for news. And he was an excellent editor. And that's what he did when he worked at the Cleveland Plain Dealer. He worked on the copy desk, editing all the copy and so forth. And so it was well written, grammatically correct, accurate, and presented, easy to read and complete. And that was the real key to what he was doing. Even though everybody didn't realize that, they just wanted to see their name. You know,
Still, it was a perfect storm of things, though, with his editing skills and the strategy of having Agate in there with all the names. It worked well because you had both.
yeah, exactly.
I want to talk real quickly about him as a person, and then I want to get to your time at the magazine, which was instrumental in the growth period. But everyone I talked to, I just recently spent some time with Joe Steranka, who at the time was PGA of America, just starting when you started the magazine, went on to become the CEO of the PGA of America. And he said, Charlie would talk my ear off. He would tell me what should be done differently. He had opinions on everything. He said, I listened to about 10% of it and put it into action, but he always had an opinion. And that was kind of your dad, from what I was told, right? I mean, just kind of had a strong opinion on just about everything.
Exactly. He did. He did. And if you asked him, he would tell you what his opinion was. And he didn't give a damn whether you liked it or not, or it hurt your feelings or not, or whatever. It's like, well, you asked me, so I'm telling you, I don't think makes sense. Or I think you ought to turn it upside down and do it that way. Or he would compliment the heck out of them. And he was that way with organizations and associations and with players. He you know he had an appreciation for all players, the best guys and the not so best guys. um it was important to him. Again, it goes back to his newspaper sense of all in, warts and all.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, now let's get to you and your tenure at the magazine. From what I read, you're in New Mexico. He comes out to visit. You're not even thinking about this. I know you had a journalism degree, but you had played football in New Mexico, and he comes out to visit. And tell us the rest of the story from there.
Well, it's a long story. It's not really a simple story. He was constantly trying to get me to come and help him. And I was a banker, and was working my way through the banking business, and junior officers and that sort of thing. Um, and he was always trying to, well, we're getting better. We're growing, and I can always find a place for you. You could help me with this. You could help me with that. And it was like, Dad, I can't do that. Um, and he he kept it up. One of the I guess the breaking point was I went through a divorce, and it was, anybody who's been through a divorce knows that's kind of a point in your life where things change, or you decided to make things change and so forth. And after him asking and asking and so forth, I called him up one day and said, Dad, I'm going to come and help you. And and I told him what was happening, and it was just time for a change, time time for me to get out of town, go somewhere different, start over. And that's what I did. And I literally packed up my car and drove across the country and drove to Winter Haven, and started the next day after I arrived, doing whatever needed to be done.
Did you know, when you looked at the books and started to comb through the fact that your dad was a good newspaper man, but not a publisher and not a sales guy by nature, that there was potential here because he had grown audience but hadn't really grown that side of the business as well? Or did that take a while to kind of figure out?
Um, the concept made sense. The concept of Florida Golf Week publishing golf news in a state like Florida, where the only um, comparative was Golf World, which was a national magazine, quote unquote, except it was it was in North Carolina, and it was focused on golf. It was focused. I mean, it published the tour stuff and some non-tour stuff, but most of anything else they published was in the southeast. and because of their format and so forth, they couldn't. They had a limit on how much they could publish. They didn't have room to publish every tournament, and certainly not every name and every score. And so Dad and I talked. We had talked about this before I decided to make the decision, and him trying to sell me on it, and it made sense what he said, but uh, but we knew it was going to be hard, and so we so I packed up and I came across and I said, okay, let's go for this. And my focus was on sales, both advertising sales um, and circulation sales, and however we could get circulation, um, any deals we could make with golf associations and so forth. And we did that in every creative way we could think of. We would go to a golf association and say, how would you like to get all of your tournaments published? Well, you buy a subscription, at a far reduced rate for every one of your members, and we'll publish every one of your tournaments, every name, every score, you know, every time. And that appealed to them. That was that was pretty basic. That was pretty easy to understand. And many of them went for it. And it didn't happen overnight. I mean, this was a long, hard slug through the snow to get it to work. Took a long time, but it worked because it did make sense, and people wanted to see it. They liked it. Who doesn't like to see their name in the paper, right? And that's what started us. And then another huge thing for us was we were getting. I had sold a little bit of advertising to Titleist, and they were doing a little bit here and there and so forth. And and through our discussions I had with them, finally I got them. Finally, I knew they were interested, truly interested, and they had the vision much the same as us. And we came up with a deal to start and this was when we made the jump to going from being regional, which that was a big jump from just being Florida, and we dropped the name Florida and it just became Golfweek, and we wanted to go national. And Titleist said, if you will publish scores from every state, from tournaments, and the same attitude that we have, the same philosophy of every name, every score from every tournament we could get a hold of, we would put those on scoreboard pages. And Titleist would pay to have a box, a small box. They weren't greedy about it. It was just a small box down in the bottom right and left hand corner of every scoreboard page that said Titleist, the number one ball in golf. And it was in black and white. And our charge was, and they paid us, I don't remember how much they paid us per page, per scoreboard page, but it wasn't a lot, but it was to us. And they said, for every scoreboard page, you get as many scores as you can, you get as many names as you can, and we'll buy as many pages as you can produce that way. And so that became our charge, of how many states could we get in Golfweek next week. And so we scoured tournaments and phone calls and friends. And when we'd go to one tournament, we'd ask about other tournaments that were happening next week or next month or so forth. And it caught on. And the tournament directors, they liked having their name, quote, in the paper, and they liked having their players' names in the paper. And they said, sure, we'll send you our results. Sure, we'll send you all of our scores. If you don't send us all your scores, we don't want it. You got to send us everybody's name, everybody's score. And if you can send us a story, fine. If not, just tell us who won. We'll write the story, whether it's 2 inches or 6 inches or whatever. Well, I mean, this is again, you got to remember, this is light years before internet and so on and so forth. And these guys were playing in tournaments all over the country, but nobody ever read about a tournament in Texas, in North Carolina, or in Florida, or in New York, or vice versa. And that's what we did. And that's how we got started. And we we had after we got started and it was working. Then I remember we had a sign up in the newsroom, in the makeup room, where all the pages were laid out, and we would keep track of how many different states we had in this coming week's, and the record was 17 states, and so we'd try to get 18 or 22 and so forth, and that was an inside joke. It didn't it didn't do anything for any of us other than our ego of what we were working hard to try to do.
Now, you say we wanted to go regional, we wanted to go national. Your dad credited you. He said basically I was pretty content with Florida Golf Week, and Tom was the one who kind of said, "Look, Dad, we could keep growing and growing and growing." Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. That's accurate. Yeah, I humbly say that. Um, it was the only way to grow. It was the only way to get interest from the major advertisers, the golf manufacturers. Florida was great and all, but and that was the leading golf state. But in order to make real headway for them to spend advertising dollars, and at the time to compete with Golf World, we had to have news from all over the country. And again, this was a hole. This was something that was not being filled. If you were a serious golfer, serious amateur golfer in Florida, you still wanted to know about the good players in Texas and California. You still knew about those famous, if you will, invitationals or amateur events going on in different states and so forth. You wanted to read about those. And so there was a market there. It was just the logistics of how do we get all of that information. And how you do it is you start with one, and then you get another one, and then you get another one. And thus our sign up in the newsroom about how many states we have in this week.
Sure. Yeah,
And
it's interesting.
yeah.
Well,
And
now I know you guys did all of that in terms of scores, which were instrumental, and then you did some course reviews, but you didn't do instruction until you made friends with someone, and it happens to be a pretty good person, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, that was our um, that was our venture into instruction with David Ledbetter. David Ledbetter and I, he was at Greenleaf and working off the back of the range at Greenleaf, and um, he started teaching mini tour players, and guess what? Some of those mini tour players became PGA Tour players, and so their friends showed up, and then he had more students, and finally Greenleaf caught on about this guy working at the back of their range, and all of these famous guys were showing up at the back of the range. They didn't even let him use the front range where the west course part of the range was. It was down at his, and he worked out of his studio apartment there in one of the condos. And and I became close friends, and we hung out together. Um, Neither one of us were. Uh, we were just all into what we were doing, working golf. Him teaching, me working golf week, however we could. Um, but we only lived whatever it was, 10, 15 miles apart. And after the sun went down, we didn't have anything else to do. So we would hang out, and so I would go over there just to break up the monotony of being at home in my apartment, and got to know, you know, some of the players that he was working with, and got to know him real well. In fact, I introduced him to his wife Kelly, because Kelly and I got paired together in a mini tour pro-am. She was playing the ladies mini tour, and they had an event in Winter Haven, and we got paired together in the same group, and it got along and so forth. And in the conversation, I told her about and she was just a young, upcoming, lady golfer out of college, had played well in college, but she was obviously trying to get on the LPGA tour, needed help with her game, didn't know where to go. And I said, well, I got a friend not very far from here. I could introduce you to him. His name's David Ledbetter. Of course, she had never heard of him. No one had ever heard of him. And so after the LPGA event was over, she stayed in town, and I took her over and introduced her to David Ledbetter. And she stuck around town for 3 or 4 days, maybe a week or something like that, and took lessons from David every day. And obviously he was helping her. And also obviously he saw her talent. He did not suffer fools. But if you were a player, he was interested in making you a better player. And she was a player. And so that's how they got to know each other. And then she went on with her mini tour career, but obviously they stayed in touch. And she showed up back in Winter Haven more often. and and the rest is history.
That's a great story. What a great
Yeah.
story. You bring up such an interesting point that some of the mini tour players go on to be pro players. And I mean, I think that that's what made this magazine successful with you and even after you, right into the next era, is when you're covering college players, when you're covering amateur players, you get to know these people as people, not as superstars. And that's something that is kind of consistent throughout Golf Week. I remember reading that, I think it was early 80s, probably right about when you came aboard. You guys, you had a Golf Week event, and Paul Azinger won it. Well, of course, Paul Azinger is going to be tied to Golf Week in the future, because it's one of the first events he won. Was that? How important was that you get to know these guys and gals when they're young,
It was, as it turned out, it was pretty important. As it turned out, your example of Paul Asinger is an excellent one. Um, he grew up reading Golf Week, and it was important to him, and it was important that he got his name in there, whether he won or not. He went down through the agate and found, Paul Asinger, 69, 74, 82, whatever, but his name was in there, and all of his scores, and all of his friends were in there too. and he could follow them around. And then when he went away to college, he, it just expanded. There was just more names that he wanted to follow, and names that wanted to follow him. It was natural. It was it was communication. It was the internet before the internet. I mean, that's what it amounted to. And yeah, we ran into a lot of players that way. They grew up. They grew up reading Golfweek. Why wouldn't you? That's that's what everybody did. And uh, part of our business sense was that we sent copies of Golfweek to every golf course in Florida, free. We sent 5 copies, and then later we increased it to 10 copies every week to every course in Florida. And then when we expanded into the Carolinas, we did the same thing into the Carolinas. So there came the golf weeks, and they would, some, had a price tag on them, and some guys would try to sell them, we heard, but they were there to be given away. And a lot of the times they ended up in the snack bar, in the coffee shop, whatever, to be passed around. So they got read by many, and that was our circulation campaign. We obviously had circulation ads inside where they could subscribe and get it at their home in the mail rather than having to go to the golf course to get it. And that worked pretty well, and that worked as we expanded, as I said, throughout Georgia and the Carolinas, and then later into the Midwest, and then obviously eventually nationally.
As someone who now works on a national magazine but has worked in local newsrooms for most of my life, you have a line. I don't know if it's on one of your social media accounts or something, but it's a former publisher and chief problem solver at Golfweek magazine, which is so apropos. These it's such a different thing when you're on a national scale, but when you're in a small property, you got to figure out how to get the proofs to certain places. You got to make sure the mailing labels are on right. You got to make whatever it is that comes through. When you think back to your time at Golfweek, give us one of those hair on fire moments that you can think of, if you have one, that you go, geez, I can't believe we got that done that day. Because I mean, we all have them in the newspaper industry where you just, you still can't believe that day happened. It never was planned that way.
Yeah, I know what you're asking, and I don't know that I could come up with one day because it happened every week. It was hair on fire, um, every week. I remember, um, the first time we got credentials to go to the Masters, um, and um, Dad and I went, and one other writer that we had at the time, and we of course had to drive there and drive back, which from Winter Haven to Augusta was a long drive, particularly back then, particularly with the cars we had. um, I mean, like all night. And but we finally got credentials, and by God, we were going, and we were going to have live story and live photos from the Masters in Golfweek. Uh, you know that, and we had to go to press on Monday, and so the three of us drove up there. Soon as the tournament was over, as soon as the tournament was over, we got in the car and headed for Winter Haven. And Dad and our other writer, they started writing, and I drove. And I drove until they were done writing. And um, and then when we got back, then we had to take, we had film, my film that I took. I was the photographer, and had to process that and then sort through and decide, what photos we were going to use. And we used more than we normally did for tournaments, for pro tournaments, especially because it was the Masters and because we had, by God, official credentials, and we were going to show those people at Augusta National that we covered it well and a lot and so forth. So we'd get our credentials next year, and that's what we did, and it was a. And then we had to, we put everything together. Then we had to drive the paper, the layout to our printer in Lakeland, and wait for it to be printed. Then load up the papers into the back of the station wagon, drive back to the office, run them through the mailing machine, put them all in mail bags, and then get them to the post office, which we did about, I don't know, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, Monday night, Tuesday morning, in order to get them in the mail, in order that people would get them by Thursday, Friday, Saturday, wherever they were going. And but we were happy to do it. We were thrilled to do it because we had firsthand coverage of Augusta National. We had firsthand Masters photos and so forth, and that was important to us. And people noticed, and people in other states noticed, and more in the Southeast noticed, and the advertisers noticed. Mr. Titleist, who was with us already, he noticed that we were there and that his ads was on, the Masters coverage and so forth. And it was important. It was fun. It was exciting, and it was hard hell.
Absolutely, I can imagine. I've been through similar experiences, but not driving all night. I can totally
Yeah,
feel your pain.
yeah.
Oh, I have a couple. I know there have been so many folks, but I want to ask about two specifically. I mean, there's a couple after you guys sold the property that, Jeff Babineau and others that have been tied to the magazine. But I want to start with James Achenbach, who obviously was just instrumental, was with the magazine forever. Can you talk a little about him, your relationship, what you remember, and what he was like to work with on a weekly basis?
he Jim and I became friends when in the early days of Golfweek, and he was the golf writer in Sarasota for the, I forget the name, Sarasota
Herald Tribune.
Herald Tribune. Yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
newspaper guy, Tom. I'm a newspaper guy.
There you go. And uh, he was a sports writer for them. I don't think he was a sports editor, but he was a sports writer, and he wrote a lot of golf along with his other duties of other sports and so forth. But he loved golf, and so he wrote a lot of golf. And Sarasota was a big golf community, and so he found out about Golf Week, and he really appreciated Golf Week, and um, he started sending us golf stories from Sarasota because he liked what we were doing. He wouldn't he, not to get paid. He didn't care about the money. He wanted to get some publicity for Sarasota golf in this regional national publication. And he knew if he sent it in to us, we'd publish it, and there, by God, would be the Sarasota JC Championship of the neighborhood, with all the players and all the scores in Golfweek next week. And and as a newspaper man, he appreciated that. That was that was lifeblood to him. Get the news. And Jim and I were about the same age, and we were both single, and we had nothing else to do but but our golf work, and we became friends and played a little golf together and became more friendly. And then as we got bigger and expanded, it we needed more editorial help, and Jim was one of our first you know grabs to go to, and he said I'd love to do it, and so he really he took it on, willingly. He was single and he loved golf and he loved writing about it. And he was a real people person, even though he was reserved in his personality and kind of quiet. He was very inquisitive, as a good reporter should be. And so he got to know the golfers and they got to know him, and he started producing great stories, great feature stories, as well as covering events. And the more we grew, then we sent Achenbach, all over, and he was glad to go. And it just grew from there.
His desire for a speedy pace of play is also legendary in the newsroom still. People still talk about how much slow play bothered him and how that was
Oh
a
God,
topic that just drove him batty.
it did. It did. Yeah, he he never stopped talking about how slow those professional golfers played. And when he played fast. And I'm a pretty fast player too, so we got along pretty good that way. When we did get a chance to play together, we didn't have a problem with hit it and get it.
That's the way it should be done. Well,
That's the
finally, Ron Balicki is just a name that's so tied to Golfweek. And again, we talked about kind of uh, learning players as people when they're younger. This is a guy who was kind of a master of that. I can tell you, I used to work in Niagara Falls where the Porter Cup, amateur tournament was, and to watch him, just the way that he was so inquisitive with young players to kind of figure out what they liked and what their games were all about, and then see the older players that come back recognize him and ask him for advice and ask him where they should play next. And he was a guy who kind of grassrootsy was as much to this publication and the game as maybe anyone, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He um Achenbach loved golf and liked covering it, and and uh, and doing stories and so forth. Ron Balicki liked it even more, but he was even more personable with the players. He was more interested in the people and the people side of it. And as with as with people like that in everyday life that guess what? People like him. And and he was genuine about it. He was absolutely genuine about liking them and being interested in them and giving them time and spending time with them and getting to know them and getting to know their parents and getting to know their uncle, because their uncle was there every time he went to a junior tournament and he saw this kid playing. He also saw this guy, and Ron would go over and say, "Who in the heck are you? I've been to, you've been to everyone." And he'd say, "Well, I'm Bobby's uncle." And he got to know Bobby's uncle. And that was just the way he was. And he was so genuine about it. Ron Balicki, boy, to talk about him, I tell you, it chokes me up. It brings a tear to my eyes to think about him. He was so good. He was so honest. He was so hardworking. He was he was so important to Golf Week and what we were trying to do, and our mantra to get every tournament, every score, every name. And Ron took that on, no problem. That was his charge. He wasn't the best golf writer we ever had, or that you've ever read, quite frankly. And he knew that, and we told him that. But um, but that's why God made copy editors, and that's what my dad was a professional copy editor. So that wasn't a problem. Just get us the stuff. And Ron, he just wrote and wrote and wrote, and it was, oh man, the trips that we had back from Augusta National when we finally got credentials to go there, and we would drive nonstop all the way back to Winter Haven from Augusta, and Ron would write and I would drive, and everybody who knew Ron Balicki loved Ron Balicki. He's one of the finest individuals I have ever known, and I would challenge anyone to come up with someone who didn't like Ron Balicki. The players, the tournament directors, the caddies. He would go into a caddy room and hey Ron. It was it was universal. He was a prince of a guy, and he was exactly what we needed at that point. Uh, and he was so happy doing it. It fulfilled him to do what he did, and yeah, it he was a wonderful, wonderful human being, person, and a dear, dear friend.
Now we get into the sale. I know that in 1990, you guys, I've read about this, but I'm sure it's not something that you wanted to do from hearing it from you guys and reading some past stories. But just tell us kind of. I also know what it's like to be in a ringer each week, right? I mean, there's no rest at that point. What were your genuine emotions at the time when you guys sold this thing?
Happy, happy. We as much as we had grown and became quote better known, and our advertising was up and our circulation was up, we were working our butts off to make ends meet. We never we never had extra money. We never everything was a everything that had to do with finances was a challenge because we started with nothing and we didn't have anything to save, and every dollar that we earned we put back into making it better, getting more of whatever we needed, whether it was people or circulation or whatever. And it just was wearing us down. And people would look at us and say, geez, you're doing so well. I remember when, da, 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 boy, oh boy, you're just knocking them dead. And we would smile and say, thank you very much. And you know, and then go rest. We were, we were, yeah, we needed to sell it. Um, we needed the money. And that, and there was no way at that point. There was no way for Dad to get out otherwise, and he was getting tired and needed to.
Makes sense. Now,
Yeah.
tell me this. I mean, I know we're a completely different version and that the world has changed 10 times over with disruptors and other things. Are you, truthfully, are you surprised it's made it to 50 years? I mean, it's a completely different publication. We're obviously national in scope now with things with USA Today, but is it still bringing you a little bit of pride when you see the magazine once in a while and go, Jesus, I can't believe it's still around?
Um, I I believe it. I'm not surprised. Why shouldn't it? Um, it's still, it's still serving that function of publishing the news and so forth. I doubt if it does as good a job, as thorough of a job of publishing every name and every score. I know it doesn't. Um, but it it I still think it's important. I still think it's important for the golf business, for the industry, for the players to have that. The internet uh, obviously fills some of the gap that was naturally there many, many years ago, but still having somewhere to go, whether it's the internet or whether it's in a publication, is important. It's important to golfers, and golfers are national. Golfers are international. Just because I grew up in Ohio, I live in Florida now. Well, I still want to know about golf in Ohio, and I went to school in New Mexico, so I would like to be able to read about that too, right? And 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 so I think the premise of is still there, but you know, the internet makes it different. It gives other opportunities to get that kind of information, obviously. Um, so yes, it has changed, um, but I think the premise is there, and I'm very proud of it that it has lasted 50 years. We never ever thought in terms of 50 years or 20 years or whatever. We thought about next week, next month, and that was that's how that's just the way we operated. That was what it was important. We getting more scores next week than we had this week, getting more states in the scoreboard pages than we had last week, or than we have ever had, or whatever. That was what was important back then, and I think that well, I did that came from my dad. That came from his journalism sense of being complete and having every name, and that just carried over and carried over, and I don't think that's I don't think that's a bad thing today, is it? That somebody wants to know. That's why.
Absolutely.
That's why. That's why God made the internet.
So true. So true. Tom Stine, listen, I so appreciate you taking an hour now out of your schedule. This is so much fun. Like I said, the stories from everyone on staff has something to ask, something to, to boast about, something that they love reading. I just personally went through a lot of the green books a couple of weeks ago, and I just, going through that, especially the early era, and then when you came aboard and seeing the progression of the magazine from the newspaper to,
Yeah.
to magazine style publication, it's just fantastic. So I really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to help you and to help you in your endeavor and what you're trying to do. I'm very honored. I'm very humbled that you're taking the time to do that. But I appreciate you doing it too. And I appreciate it for my dad, and I appreciate it for all the other people that were with us along the way, and it helped us. Um, that was we couldn't have done it without them, and that's really important to me. Happy birthday to Golf Week. My goodness, 50 years. I remember when you were a baby. I'm so proud of all that Golf Week has accomplished and the way it's grown. And I'm so proud of all the people that helped Dad and I get it started, keep it going, and and grew it and made it what it is today. It's very touching and very heartfelt that I say happy 50th birthday to Golf Week.